Sure you can. I work cheap. Um, I'm low maintenance, coach. That, that's the way I like it. A lot of new things coming up. Yeah, I posted a little bit of a schedule for just the next 2 weeks, and I'm going to give a kudos to another one of our guests. Regular once in a while, she comes on, Cynthia Mendenhall. She connected me with somebody in a church in Delta, Ohio. And so as of today, I'm scheduled for probably a 2-day event. It's an outdoor event in at the church, but it's dealing with outdoors, hunting, fishing, trapping, boating, bow and arrows, and fly fishing, all kinds of stuff at from 9 o'clock to 4. And I've been asked to be the keynote speaker at 3 o'clock and basically tie everything together and bring it to a gospel message for the community. And it's pretty well attended from what I understand. It's west of Toledo. But before that, next Sunday, in 2 Sundays, I will be in Western PA speaking at a church. I have a podcast to do from somebody in Florida. I did that's on Thursday, and last Friday I did one from somebody in the Windy City, which it was windy here where I live, and I was worrying whether the connection would hold. So um, that's just some speaking stuff, and then I'm waiting for one more image for my second children's book to come out and send that off to Shine a Light Press, and they're excited to maybe by July I'll have book number 2 in the series. So a lot of things happening.
Okay, is the mic now? My microphone is working, folks. It's you didn't hear everything I said earlier. We are experiencing a mountain of technical problems, but this is the least. The microphone actually does work. It just didn't broadcast. So I'm glad they could hear you, Ben. It's probably just as well that they don't hear me. I noticed, and while you're talking, what I'll do is I'm going to go to Facebook, and I'm going to try to get that picture of that little fawn, which is the book cover of your new book. And what?
Well, it's not quite the book cover. That hasn't been determined yet.
Oh, it was like a concept.
Um, no, that's just one of the images in the pages
Oh,
of the book.
it's just well, it is beautiful, and I have kind of a soft place in my heart for little fawns, because they're so delicate and so precious, and yet that they are going to grow up to be so majestic and so strong and so fast, and it's just amazing how you see these little critters that, and it's not unusual for a dog to befriend one that's been abandoned or lost its mother or something like that. Why do you have any technical expertise into why dogs and little fawn deer hang around?
Well, I'll tell you, this is a story that's a true story of one of the farmers I worked with. Um, Around this neck of the woods, deer grow up to become insurance nightmares because people hit so many of them with their car. And then they sometimes leave an abandoned fawn. And this guy actually was able to get a fawn that the doe was killed, and his Australian shepherd had pups and raised that fawn
Mm-hmm.
with the pups nursing from the dog, which is kind of, you talk about an affinity with each other. The the female dog became the surrogate mother for the fawn.
Isn't that sweet? That just that just touches my heart. And I guess if you were to unravel that a little bit spiritually, I could argue, that we have put a gap between us and God, and God provided an intermediary through Jesus Christ, where we can have access to Him and His kingdom and His fellowship. And I guess these little nature reminders help us remember that we are in need of, we need nursing, we need nurturing, and we nurture each other. That's the horizontal component. But we also get our nurture vertically from God, and then also inward out through the Holy Spirit. So if you give that some thought, God's love is depicted everywhere, but particularly in nature.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. And I know that you watch a lot, and I've picked up on some of your habits, Coach. I've checked out a few things on the dodo, and can really enjoy sitting and watching. It's one of those things that you can get caught up, and you can watch video after video and see some of the different interesting things that goes on with nature, and they do a good job at what they do. I want to share the second thing, might be a surprise to you. You caught some of the issues, but as of last week, or maybe just a little bit before last week, and soon to be officially unveiled, I will be a new member of VineWords.
Dude.
Yeah, Diane asked me, was asking me for some potential people that might fit an opening, and she did some twisting of the arm, and I agreed. So that's fresh off the press news.
Well, it is, and it's funny because I just spoke with Diane yesterday at some length, and she did not bring that up. So I think that is breaking news, and I can't think of a better organization in terms of, and that's not to say there aren't some good ones out there. There are, but I haven't seen anything that comes close to VineWords in terms of being a cohesive and unified team. I was telling Diane the difference between a group and a team. You know the difference?
Team works together.
Yeah, a group is simply means they coexist in the same space, whether that space be virtual or physical. Any assembly of people is a group, but a team has two things. One, a common purpose, and a coach. Okay, a team has, or a leader of some kind. And there's a lot of groups out there. I get conversations with people, and they say, "Oh, I've got a group of Facebook 5,000," and they start all this stuff. And whenever I hear the word "I've got," I kind of pause, and think. I want to interrupt them and say, "Oh, you mean these people are on your payroll?" When you say you've got a Facebook group, and it's often shocking when they find out. They think they've got 5,000 people. Let's say they come on PJNet and they announce to their Facebook group of 5,000 people, and none show up. So how many do they really have?
They have 5,000 potential green dots.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a lot of chat. And I wonder sometimes people grieve, about the lack of corporate worship in the pandemic, if it's still that. But virtually, is that the same thing? You can multiply it, you can have more of them, but is it still? How do you put that on the scales and weigh it?
I've listened to Andy Clapp, and whenever I've actually sat in. There's a benefit to being able to sit into somebody's church service that would take 7 or 8, 9 hours to drive away, but that's not my church family. You got to almost be face to face and interact to be a church family. If you did everything without interacting with your guest on here and just said, okay, here's our guest, and it clips to a reel and you play that, there's no interaction between you and whoever's on the big screen. That's just, like you've said in the past, that's just a program.
Or a show. I object to the word show. A show is
Yeah,
an
okay.
act. It doesn't have that authenticity.
I refer to this as a broadcast.
Yeah, a program.
Yeah, a
It's a
program or
broadcast. Right.
a broadcast as opposed to a podcast, because I think that's just voice, not video. So
Yeah, yeah, and it took me a while to figure out what pod stood for. I thought it was like iPod. You know what POD stands for?
point of something,
Play on demand.
play on demand. Okay.
Play on demand. Yeah, it's a podcast. Did you know? Hey, I have an announcement. Hey, teacher, it's me. An individual had contacted me wanting some advice on microphones and audio. They were saying, more and more people are doing Zoom meetings and podcasts, and you start to see how crappy some gear is, And for some reason, I just invested quite a bit of time with her, and I composed a 2-page email, which is not like me. I don't have that kind of time, with specific recommendations explaining the polarization of a mic. Okay, this particular mic has 4 polarizations. What that means is the way that it receives sound. Okay, unidirectional or omnidirectional is considered, that's pretty standard, which means it picks up sound from all directions. This mic can be set up cardioid. Cardioid means it rejects sound from the back. You can't hear that air conditioner running back there. But it takes, parabolic. Have you ever seen a parabolic mic? I've got one.
Maybe you showed it to us before. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever watched a football game and seen those guys holding that big dish? That is a parabolic mic. And the parabola, okay, basically sound waves entering directly in front of it will bounce off, and I can show you the geometry, will reflect off the parabola back to the microphone in the middle, but sound coming from any other direction reflects and it doesn't get to the microphone. So this is a way of just laser zooming in, and they use them in sports broadcasts so you can hear the quarterback and, call the play, call the signals, call the cadence. But anyway, I sent this to her, and I didn't think anything of it. Well, she writes back, and she's the editor for The Right Life or some big newsletter that goes out, and big website blog type thingy. And she asked, "Can I use that?" I thought, well, sure. I mean, it's got, and it just got published.
I actually saw that and read it.
Really? Yeah. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't in there. There was some preaching in there about when we do things. One of the guiding principles in my life, and I hope everybody, there's a verse of scripture, Ben, that says this: work as unto the Lord and not as unto human masters. Now, what that means to me is we need to do our best. What does it mean to you, Ben? Is that my own track there?
No, I think you're right on.
And so many people appear to be just giving it a try. I mean, I rejoice that people do selfies and proclaim the gospel in any manner possible. But something happened before PJNet ever got started. Well, actually, when it got started, only Barbara knows this. But when PJNet started, my hair was very long, and I wore a tricorn hat. And of course, I was trying to appeal to the patriots, out there in the political theater of battle. And my message was this: we need to get the attention of elected officials. All this griping and complaining we're doing online isn't really changing anything. We need to get the attention of elected officials and let our voices be heard to them, because they actually cast votes, pass laws and things, And my wife said, "Oh, so you want to be taken seriously by a United States congressman?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Do you really think they're going to take you seriously in that stupid hat and long hair?" And that really got to me. Okay, why did I tell you that long story? Well, when you put together a video of a selfie, a podcast, or whatever, a post on Facebook, okay, think about this. Do you want to be taken seriously? Well, of course. Well, then why don't you take it seriously? It's funny. People want to be taken seriously, yet they don't want to take things seriously, because that would mean investing in themselves, taking an act of faith, buying. This is the mic that I recommend. It's half the price I bought this one for today. They've got a newer model, but it is the best mic. Anyway, how'd I get off on that? But anyway, I was pretty honored that they would give a hoot about what I thought about microphones.
Yeah, well, you were talking about online churches and stuff. Do you remember back in the 70s when a church would have a film night and it was a B-rated Christian movie and everything seemed to be off? You could tell there wasn't unknown actors and the message was Christian oriented, but boy, the filming was subpar. Mm-hmm. The sound was subpar, and the wider you tried to view it, the worse it was to see. I remember playing at one of those movies down in the Caribbean island of St. Kitts on a big wall, and it just didn't come across well. But, with things like the Kendrick brothers that mm-hmm. Facing the Giants and Flywheel, and they've really taken the Christian branding and brought it up to speed to what Hollywood, so that they can compare. And like you were saying, do your best, provide your best. If you're doing it for God, He wouldn't want something subpar, B-rate. He would want you to do your best. So people like that, the Kendrick brothers and others, DreamWorks does some good filming, but I think in the realm, whenever churches can't meet together, we can move over and to carry both online and in person. But boy, I sure hope we never get out of the habit of forsaking the fellowship, the bringing together, as Hebrews tells us, of one another in common worship, because we need each other face to face. We meet each other's needs. Like you said, the vertical and the horizontal happens more face to face and in person. It mm-hmm. can happen distance, but I don't know if you know this, but I'm a certified online educator, and they wanted to try to get me to be a B teacher online, and I said, you can't, because mm-hmm. it's hands-on. Mm-hmm. It's hands-on, and you need to be able to handle some things. Go to the bee yard and let them handle it, and let them pull a frame of bees out. And I took the course. I'm certified, but I said I don't want to do a beekeeping course that is online, remote, and distant. It just doesn't work for me.
Well, I know in my quest to become competent in 3D animation, Ben, I compare it to riding a bicycle. You can read 20 books on riding a bicycle, and you'll never be able to ride a bicycle. You'll fall. You've really, at some point, you've got to get on that thing and try and fail, fall down, and get back up. And that's very much the way I've watched probably hundreds of hours of tutorials, and they are worthwhile. But it's when that tutor gets with me and looks over my shoulder, and I'm sure, you're doing it. There's just something about it. And I think in so many ways, oh, you got me preaching now. You got me thinking, Ben. We are, the lowercase c church is very diligent to equip the believers with training and knowledge. I think we're pretty well trained. You know the problem?
I know what the problem is. It's going to be in my message when I talk about the bees tonight.
Okay, we'll talk about the bees. Folks, for the kids out there, this is not about the birds and the bees, okay? This is just the bees, okay? So tell me when you want the picture put up, Ben, and I'll put it up there.
Well, you can put it up and start with it now, because this is what...
Move over a little bit.
This is what I've been doing. Wrong way.
Wrong way. Yeah.
I keep moving.
Now we're doing it. Now you got it. You're there.
So this was Sunday. I come home from church, and I've been trying to get into my beehives to check for swarm cells and to try to prevent them from leaving the box. And so I tried to share a video with Coach, and with the complications, it didn't quite work out yet. But right over top of my hat, my bee veil, is the second swarm in my apple tree. And that one is twice the size as the one I'm looking at facing. And the difference would be, I won't say twice. One was probably a 3-pound swarm. The one behind me was probably a 5-pound swarm. To non-beekeepers, that doesn't mean anything. A pound of bees is about 3,500 bees. So we're looking at 11,000 bees in the one that I'm looking at versus something that's pushing 16,000 bees. That makes a difference. The guy that got the bees behind me was tickled to death. He thought, man, this is really good. And I'm selling my bees dirt cheap to the people that take my beekeeping classes and trying to pay it forward. After they take the class, they now have bees and want them. But swarming is one of two ways bees reproduce. The first way is pretty obvious. You have a queen in a box, and she mates when she's young. At about 3 weeks old, her cervix closes and she can no longer mate. So she has all the material she needs to, down your way, Coach, they could last 5 years. She only mates when she's young, and they end up depleting their sperm basically as they get older. It's no different than a milk cow that doesn't produce 100 pounds of milk every year or every day for every year that it's alive and in lactation. The bees kind of slowly, they start off strong and then they taper off. So up here, I actually try to requeen by either splitting or letting them swarm. And that's a way for them to reproduce, but the queen also lays eggs and reproduces. So there's two kinds of reproduction going on in the swarm. And so the video that I wanted to show, my son Wesley took a nice video and added some slow-mo to it. But I put my hand up on that branch above my head. There's a drop cloth down in front of a box. And I posted that a day or two ago on my story, and once it gets posted, it goes off into somewhere purgatory, and you can't look at it
in the bit
anymore.
bucket. Yeah.
Yeah, it gets dumped. But I do have it on my phone. But that's what I wanted to try to show. But I shake that swarm down on the blanket, and then I knock on the back of the box. It creates a vibration. Last month I talked to you, or last month or the month before, whichever one I talked to you about bees, learning the communication of the bees by sound, and vibration is one of them. They're looking for a hollow space to live in when they leave and swarm. And the queen goes with that and leaves a new queen to hatch out in her place. And so when I knock on the back, it provides a hollow sound. That vibration activates it. I have another short film a video that Wes took, and the bees are actually running into the entrance of that box. Amazing. It's my way. I love performing in front of a live studio audience or outside audience, and I'll ask, do you want me to do it the hard way, which is you shake the bees in the box and quickly put the lid in before they all come out? Or would you like me to whisper to them or ask them to politely go into the box on their own power? And they said, you can do that? And so I go through the same motions, and the bees and they're fascinated. The gut check reaction is when I shake those bees, in that little swarm, 11,000 bees drop to the ground, and some of them fly, and everybody steps back. Wes has seen me do it enough that in the camera, he stays put and doesn't step back. But a lot of people will step back. But in a swarm, if the queen is there and her pheromone is present, they're not going to leave that queen so much, and they're not protecting a home because they're actually on the market looking for a home, while scouts are going out looking for a hollow tree, somebody's vent in their attic, or a bee box or a bait hive that I might have sitting up. They're looking for the perfect place for that size swarm. They are mathletes because they know the size of the swarm. The scouts will go find a hole that they can fit in. If it's too small, they'll come back and say, we're not interested. If it's big enough, they'll then go into a tree cavity where they can actively fit all their bees, and they'll go in. The scouts actually go in and they will circle this way, and they are measuring the hollow space. They're taking the circumference of the open void space, and she flies back and communicates that to the rest of the bees and to the queen that wants to leave. And then they actually put out a pheromone that she gathers interest in, the waggle dance that we talked about before. She gathers interest. The more excited she is, the faster she does figure eights and moves around and vibrates, the more attention she gets. And then more scouts will go check it out, and they will eventually leave and go into that open space. But right next to my beehives, behind me is a little box that's a bait hive. They never go into that bait hive. They always land in that apple tree. Last year I caught at least 6 swarms in that apple tree, and this year I've already caught 2. And actually 3. I caught 3 swarms in that apple tree this year. And they don't go in that smaller box because it's probably not big enough. It wouldn't have been big enough for that 5-pound swarm. So as I'm doing this, especially Sunday, I come home from church, I think I'm just going to check on a couple boxes, and I turn around behind me and I see 2 nice swarms. Those are the equivalent of about $100 to $150 worth of bees. The bigger one would be much more. And then you put that into those boxes, take it wherever you want to put it, and start a hive, and you're all set up. They will start building new comb if you don't have comb in the frames. But that's how they reproduce as a colony. The bees reproduce as a colony, and they individually reproduce by the queen laying eggs. Now, I want to change it because you brought up that question about the church. How does the church reproduce?
In similar fashion. And one, we are to make disciples. So you've got each one reach one.
Right.
Okay. But then if you look at, if you are in a home, if the father is the husband is the spiritual leader in that house, you indoctrinate, educate, raise up in the admonition of the Lord in your environment. But then of course we are to reach outside of that environment. So you have, it's not the horizontal and vertical, but there is the inward and there is the outward.
Yeah, and that's one of that's our home, and I think that's more important even than the church. We need to do that in our homes long before we're doing it in our churches, because I think it's God, family, church, and work, and other things that you bring into your life. That's kind of my order. I've seen a lot of other people do that same order, that it's God first, and then God ordained the family long before he ordained the church.
Exactly.
So you've got to do that in your home. And then those families gather together in a local assembly. And I pray that all of them open up and they can do that together in a facility. And it's great if you have shut-ins or somebody that can't make it there and they can watch online, and I'm all for that. But you can't forsake the assembling together, because that's where real ministry and real encouragement and real edification, I think, face to face. I can't lay hands on you and pray for you right now. I can pray for you in the same spirit, but there's something about laying hands on somebody. That I was asked to pray for somebody that had a back surgery today at church, and because of COVID, I didn't go and touch her, but I kept social distances But the good report is she had back surgery and she came out okay, not because I prayed, but I think because the church body prayed. And you can't do that as well from a distance. But what I was getting at, the church reproduces. How does it reproduce?
Division and
And
division and multiplication.
right, individually, same way that you were starting off talking about that, individually, by each one reach one, and bringing them into the church. The church really wasn't a place to bring them in to get saved. It was individuals to be out in their sphere of influence and share the gospel with them. And then they get saved and bring them in and they start. But also the church corporately as a local assembly, how big should it get? The bees can only fill so much of a space in their hives. When they start to get crowded, it's time for that queen to split off and start a new colony somewhere within 3 miles. And I see churches that want to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they put satellites out where you can watch from this satellite and go in, but some of them will actually put church satellites out that's a physical building, and that's much better because you have that one-on-one koinonia fellowship gathering together of saints. But I think we tend to want to get the American church has kind of gotten, maybe, can I dare say, lazy, and they just want to build their empire bigger and bigger. Have you ever heard of a good church split or a church closing as a good thing?
Well, yes, I have. Most church splits are hostile.
Right. I went with our pastor and another guy to look at a church that we got rid of the old pews, and we finally got up to where we got stackable chairs.
Oh, okay.
By the way, you know what a servant's heart means. If somebody comes up to you and tells you got a servant's heart, that means they're helping Coach Prasek at a conference unload and load up boxes and all kinds of stuff, or you're stacking chairs.
Yeah.
But
it's easier to get help to set up than to tear down.
Yeah, because everybody wants to go home. But this church, not too far from ours, closed. Most people would say that's a shame. When we ask, why did the church close, and we were buying these individual stackable chairs, they said, we don't need them anymore. The elderly people in our church, they went to heaven. They graduated to their retirement home out of this world. And everybody else in the church went into ministry. They're either missionary serving overseas or they're doing their own church. They've split off and they've taken that precious gospel or that ministry and took off and went someplace else because there wasn't anybody left. That's a good church split or a good closure because you're going to the ends of the earth. You think of the apostles that went out 2 by 2 and went all over the place and they started churches, and those churches started churches. Very few church planting ministries today actually plant churches. It's hard to plant churches, especially if you're a foreigner coming into it's easier for an indigenous person to plant churches and then reproduce by splitting and going off in another direction. I know I was involved with a very large church at one time, and nobody would even have known whether I was there on Sunday or not. It was that big. There was no personality. There was no, unless you got involved in small groups, you could be hidden. And a lot of people want to be hidden when they go to church because they don't want to be asked to do something, or they don't want to, step out of their comfort zone and step out in faith. I really appreciate working with the bees and seeing just little nuggets like this of seeing how a colony God fashioned into their desire. We're getting too big for our britches in this building or in this house, in this beehive, And so it's time for some of us, it's not one bee. The queen doesn't go and leave by herself. She takes half the hive roughly, and they go and they work together and they leave. They take the DNA, the genetics of that base hive that's been a good productive hive, and they take it elsewhere in the bee world 3 miles down the road, start a whole new colony and propagate their lifestyle. Isn't that what the church really should be doing? You get up to a certain number, I'll throw a number out. If you get 200, 300 people in a church, that's probably comfortable. If you get 2,000, 3,000, maybe the other side of town or 20 miles out could use a church somewhere that would benefit. You could come together at times, but go out where the people are. That's what the early disciples on their missionary journeys did, and that's what Paul did. And I see so much in nature. If we would just learn from them and apply good Christian biblical principles to it, that Great Commission would be fulfilled.
Ben, I don't know how it is up where you are, but I can assure you down south that if you see a Baptist church, you got to have a name. So you got First Baptist Church of blank, that's going to be in the center of town with stained glass windows and a big high but then subsequent Baptist churches will be called other things. They won't be second, third, fourth. You very seldom will you see a second Baptist church. Almost never.
We have one that I pass every Sunday when I go to church.
But if you see here down south a Baptist church called Harmony Baptist Church or Unity Baptist Church, I can promise you that was a result of a hostile split. A couple things came to my mind as you talked, and when you talk about physical presence, a dear friend of the family, my father was good friends with a guy named Paul Eliezer. His wife was good friends with my mother. Their children were good friends with me. I mean, we were just a very, very tight family. Well, Paul Eliezer became very ill and was due to have surgery. And I found myself in his hospital room with the pastor and several deacons. And it was decided to pray for Mr. Eliezer before he left the room to go down to surgical waiting. And so we all prayed. Each one of us individually, not at the same time, but serially prayed for him. And Ms. Eliezer told me later that impacted Paul. He says, I can remember even in all that pain and all the medication, he said that Mark prayed for me. And Ms. Eliezer said, Edna was her name, she said, well, Mark, together with the pastor, together with several deacons, he said, I don't remember anybody else praying for me. You know what the difference was?
Touched him.
I touched him. I put his hands in mine and we prayed. And if you don't think there's something to that, well, you ain't right. That's all there is to it. I am totally fascinated with what you told me about the bees calculating the interior volume of a future prospective home. Now, folks, we humans are incredibly smart. Incredibly smart. All right, so if you don't believe in miracles, maybe you didn't hear what Ben just said. I want you to manually calculate the volume of one bee and multiply that by about 10,000. If half of them leave, you said there's about 5,000 bees. So multiply that by 5,000, and then I want you to take the interior volume of a sphere or cube or polygon. I want you to calculate that and come up with the interior cubic centimeters or inches or feet or whatever. A human would be at odds trying to make those kinds of calculations.
Don't they have an app for that?
I am utterly amazed. And these same people, there are many out there that do not believe in God. I truly, truly don't get it. The the world, the creation, declares the glory and the majesty and the sovereignty of God. And I am blown away I had no idea. I mean, they kind of, I understand scoping it out a little bit, but how can they be that precise in their measurements? How can they be that smart?
Because I think a little bit of the wisdom of God is trickled in all of his creation. I have this theory that, well, not a theory, because this is the way I handle the first couple chapters of Genesis. I think God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit is evident in the creation week, the 6 days. And God the Father orchestrated it. Jesus the Son spoke it into existence, and the Holy Spirit put the flair, the vibrant colors, the life-giving, all the things that we stand and look at something and say, this is beautiful, but God the Father started that with the intelligence and wisdom, and there's a small little heavenly fingerprint of God on everything that he created. If we look close enough, if we listen to him, and the Spirit will share with us the beauty of what we see. People will say, oh, isn't that a beautiful sunset or whatever? Well, but yeah, it is, but it just happened to be beautiful that time. It's never, doesn't, you can't expect that to happen more than once. Well, it happens every day somewhere. There's going to be a beautiful sunset in more than one place. But I'm just amazed at how God's creation points to himself. And why would he do it any other way than that? There's certain species of pine trees that when the new growth comes on and you take pictures of them, the tips of the new growth coming on looks like a cross. And, he didn't have to do that. It could have looked like a triangle or a box or a polygon, but it looks like a cross, and that gives an opportunity, a door that's cracked open or a foothold to share with somebody else that's looking at it. Isn't that amazing? Look at what God did over here. And they're looking at it. Is JD in the room tonight?
He sure is right now. Mm-hmm.
He'll appreciate this, because this will lead up, and JD likes, every once in a while JD will put a humorous meme or put a joke on there. But I don't think I shared this with you before, but there's 3 people standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. One of them's a pastor, one of them's a geologist, and one of them's a farmer. The geologist stands at the edge and looks at it and says, look at all the sedimentary layers and the structure of this canyon that over millions of years took to erode, and what it created and crafted into hard rock is what we're standing and looking at, and is in awe from a geological standpoint. The pastor look at this wonderful evidence of the waters receding from the Noah flood, and it carved out this canyon as a reminder of who God is and how he protected a small band of people when the world was at an evil point. And the farmer just scratches his head and says, you guys see something way different than me. I look at it and says, what a heck of a place to lose a cow. It's all in perspective of how we are taught in our schools, in our colleges. Doug shared a little bit last night, and you guys could have gone on forever. Mm-hmm. But what is being taught from basically the ground up, from preschool up, and it's forget Christianity, forget biblical ideas were based on science. And we found out just with masks and COVID, we don't even know based on science what we know. But it's all perspective. And so what you have in your back, in your toolbox, in your backpack, that you've lived through, somebody like that man that was in the hospital remembered Coach Prasick praying for him. Even there might have been 10 people there, whatever. Something basically struck a spiritual nerve that made a difference. And I think that's what God is calling me to do when I look at nature, when I write, when I speak, when I engage with people, and find that common ground, and then look to our wonderful, matchless, majestic God that created everything for our good pleasure. It's amazing to sit back and people know it just all happened out of some gooey swamp millions of years ago.
Well, Ben, I'm glad you mentioned the Grand Canyon. We've been to the Grand Canyon, and I can remember the ranger coming up to us. It wasn't part of a tour or presentation. It was just conversational. And he says, it took millions and millions and millions of years for that river to carve this great canyon. And my father looked up at him and said, well, it must have been a government contract. It must have been. I remember when my daughter, and you talk about the home. My daughter came home and she was studying geology or whatever. And the purported theory is that, if you stand at the canyon and look down, you see the river, you say, oh yes, over millions of years, this river carved this canyon. Okay. And I had to, this was my first opportunity to interact with my daughter and intervene, I should say, and say, that is a theory. That is not a fact. I said, now, and then Ben, you know very well what a topographical map is. Okay. Now, a topographical map basically shows elevations. Okay. It's a flat map, but it shows ridges, anyway. All right. Now, the Grand Canyon snakes its way all around, but it's still basically flowing south. Okay? That's at the end of the day, it's flowing south. Yes, there are times it literally snakes. Okay. All right, so let's look at the elevation of the rim of that canyon at the northern end of the canyon. And write that number down. And then go to the southern end of that snaky river and measure the elevation of the rim of that canyon at the southern end. Well, an interesting thing happens. The elevation of the southern rim of the canyon is actually higher than the northern rim. So, Dr. Bottle Stopper, if you think that the river carved that canyon, you must also think that water flows uphill. I don't believe the earth is millions of years old. But it amazes me that things are purported as science, as factual. And so I went to the teacher and said, I object to teaching only this. It could have been a glacier that carved it. How do we know? It could have been a worldwide flood. Oh, about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. Well, the teacher would hear nothing of it. This is the consensus is that the scientific consensus. Well, Ben, is truth based on consensus?
No.
There was consensus that the world was flat for a long time. There was solid consensus, not only in the scientific community, but the church community, that the sun revolved around the earth. The only science that I know that is based on consistent is color. If you look at this studio that adorns me here, you will notice that there's some blue in it. And we would all agree that's blue. Okay. Well, what color is it? Well, when people ask that question, I ask a simple question. What color is this object? And you point to something red. And they would say red. I say, well, I don't know what color it is. All I do know is that it reflects a certain spectrum of light that we, by consensus, consider red. But there is, and believe me, I'm studying light and color and all that. And there is, all colors are a derivative of three colors, RGB, red, green, blue. And all millions and millions and millions of colors are derived from that. But it's useful for us to call this blue or red or yellow or black, whatever. But outside of that, truth should not be acknowledged by consensus. If there is an absolute truth, then we need to pursue it, even if we know that we can't ultimately get there. But we must pursue. If absolute truth exists, it therefore must be knowable. We must be about knowing it. But that is not the world we live in today. That is not the model. Ben, do you remember the Null Hypothesis? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I might have a book with some of that information here on my shelf.
Well, I'm a scientist, okay? And one of the things that science, in the tenets of science, we resolve not to interject our own bias into an experiment. So the way you conduct any experiment is you basically control all the variables and you alter one of them. You isolate one variable, alter that. Right. The null hypothesis purports that there will be no change. Now, why do we say that? Well, to avoid bias. Because if you say, oh, if we do this, then this will happen. Well, then now you have biased your experiment. You're trying to achieve an end result to bolster your hypothesis. So we start with the null hypothesis. You change this variable, nothing will happen. It'll be the same. Well, I was invited to be the judge at a science fair when my daughter was in about the 7th grade. And I went to booth after booth, and I was excited to be doing this because I love the hunger for the acquisition of knowledge. But I went booth after booth, and they all started with a theory and then an experiment to prove that theory. And I said, well, what about the null hypothesis? Never heard of it. None of them had ever heard of it. And I went to the sponsors, the teachers that were doing this. I said, I saw some very, very clever experiments and projects, but none of them knew what the null hypothesis. And the teachers looked at me like, "What's that?" And I remember one, they had 2 basketballs, and they were inflated at different pressures. So they took a standard weight of 5 pounds, put it on the end of a string, pulled it up, and sure enough, the ball with less air didn't roll as far, But he started out with a hypothesis to that effect. Folks, the purpose of experimentation is not to prove a hypothesis. The purpose of experimentation is an observation to formulate a hypothesis. See, we don't even know what truth is anymore.
Well, you said about science fairs, and I've judged many of science fairs to the point where I got tired of it. The only ones I would do is the local Christian high school, and they would do it every 2 years, and they had to bring, one of the judging criteria was a biblical element into their science fair. I love that. I love seeing that. But one of the most common things, you talk about identifying what is truth. Many of the students would do a project, and then some of their sources would be Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. Do you know how you get the definition at Wikipedia?
Just publish it.
It's whoever decided to put the last definition in. Mm-hmm. It is not recognized in the scientific world as a credible source. No. But kids go quickly, and adults do as well, and think Wikipedia, that's the Noah Webster dictionary of today. It is not. No. Because if you want to see what word changed, if you could track from the time Wikipedia started, one of the highest changing 2 words is creation and evolution. Oh. and it ping pongs back and forth because one side versus the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And so it has changed more often than not. But, we are truth believers. There's one truth, one interpretation, and many applications depending on your walk in life. But some people mess that up and say, well, there's many interpretations. Not if you're God and you inspired the writing of the Bible. He meant one thing.
Well, there's absolute truth. There is absolute truth.
And then there's the near and the far in prophetic things. He could be talking about this, but it also applies to something 100 years, 1,000 years down the road, and that's still truth. But many people get it mixed up, and they'll say, well, that's your interpretation of it.
That's true for you.
That's the Bible. That's the Bible's interpretation.
It's either true or it's not.
Right.
It's interesting how the discipline of science itself has evolved, and science was never a discipline of faith. Yet that is exactly what has happened. Is science has become a religion, to where they are making truth claims with a purpose, and that's why I brought up the null hypothesis. The purpose of a theory should not be to formulate an experiment to prove the theory correct. Anyway, I already said that. So, well, Ben, it has been. I'm glad we got some extra time tonight, because there is nobody out there that doesn't agree with me that you are a wealth of knowledge, information, but more importantly, wisdom. And we appreciate the truth that you have shared tonight, and it's always good to have you with us. I'm going to go join the chat room and see what was said about you, and I hope you'll do the same.
All right, thanks, Coach.
There you go. Well, there's the view high atop the Eagle's Nest Studios, and yes, everything held together, partly because, well, Ben prayed that it would. And thank you, Ben, for your prayers. Thank you, all of you, for your prayers. Since we're going long and no one seems to have left, I have a captive audience I wanted to share with you. Yes, we are still working on 3D animation. We are working furiously on it. Okay. And I keep saying things like, man, I can't wait till this Friday to show you what we've done and what we're doing. And what happens is I keep raising the bar. There are several visions, and I'm also learning how to learn. Okay. I was so new at this, you don't know what you don't know. And unlike software development, where you have an end goal in mind and you break that down into manageable pieces, and then you tackle each manageable piece and then assemble it all together. Well, that's not the way you paint. And doing a video is, in fact, painting a picture. And I was focused on things like building a piece of lumber, building a fence, building a gate. And these are the details that were going to be part of a bigger picture. And I'm learning that that's not the way you do it. The way you do it is you paint with the broad strokes first. You paint the environment, the setting, and then you fill in the details. So I was kind of working backwards, upside down, or something like that. And so I'm having to step back and look at bigger things. I'm very fast. I've never been more excited about a project as I have this. And I was talking to an outfit today to find a tutor that's specifically skilled in some of these things I want to do, like building a waterfall. Okay, yes, you can literally create water, physics, spray, foam, so many things. And these are big projects, and it frustrates me because I was sharing with my wife earlier today. I said, I have been talking about this for weeks and weeks and weeks, yet I have nothing that I can actually show you. Well, I wanted to kind of explain that the reason is we're going from the big down to the small. It would be very easy to show you small things, and I do want to show you, but I spend hours and hours and hours, probably I would say 20 to 30 to 40 hours a week, either doing or observing or watching a tutorial or working with a tutor. We are going to get there, but this is the hardest thing I've ever done. But I have never been more encouraged about what I'm doing than I am right now. And I can't wait. I was extrapolating out, okay, if we go at the present pace, I figure I'll be competent probably around September, October, November-ish. Okay. If we could start putting children videos together, little books, video books. Let's say we started in January. Well, that would be of 2022. All right. Well, let's presume that I could produce one book per week, which is very optimistic. But let's just assume that I could do that and keep a pace all year. At the end of the year, we would have a library of 50 children's gospel, biblically based, entertaining, educational books, bedtime stories in the year 2023. That seems like a long way off, and I'm old. I don't have that kind of time, God. Come on, help me out. But folks, it is a long-term vision, and that's going to require some patience and perseverance. I've got the patience, but the perseverance that it's going to take to get from where we are to where we're going. And God, I appreciate you all. God, I appreciate your prayers. I appreciate your encouragement. I appreciate your long suffering and the way you hang in there and you hang in there. And I'm just grateful for each one of you. Well, folks, that's going to wrap it up for PJNet tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night about 9 o'clock and p.m. at night, Eastern time. And until then, I challenge you to ask yourself 2 questions. Here's the first. What is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? And you may say, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is. Or maybe you're wondering what that is. Either way, the next question is even more profound. How long ago was that? I hope none of us will be satisfied with either answer.